Right, guys, welcome to this episode of the Inside Line F1 Podcast Live. There's a lot of stuff happening here on the Inside Line F1 Podcast and Pits To Podium. We've been having so many of these live sessions. It's been so much fun to come to you with so many different topics, having so many different guests and opinions and voices on. But today, it's going to be a rather different one. So, firstly, my name is Soumil Arora. You might know me from the Driving Force on Disney Plus Hotstar, and by this stage on the Inside Line F1 Podcast as well. And joining me as always, let's just say I'm the co-host right here. Joining me as always is the man who built up this podcast, Kunal Shah, the ex-marketing head of the Force India Formula One team. Kunal, I think the topic that we have today is a real curveball, and it might get us thinking quite a fair bit. It should be a fun discussion today, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opening and the introduction, Soumil. It is a very interesting topic. It's something that's brewing at the back of every Formula One fan, team, drivers' heads. So we thought, okay, why don't we just bring it out in the open and discuss it, on our live stream. And as you guys know, the live stream happens pretty much every non-Formula One weekend. So we actually look forward to the non-F1 weekends as much as we look forward to the F1 weekends as well. And on this live stream, we've got a special guest. His name is Dipak. He is the senior sports reporter for motorsport for the Hindu publication, right? But I must say, he comes from and he lives in the good old motorsport capital of India, which is Chennai. And sorry, Deepak, I've always grown up calling it Madras, right? But Chennai it is. And for me, it's always, Sarvana Bhavan or Murugan Idli after Sri Perambudur. So thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm excited as well.
Yeah, I hope you've been doing well and enjoying the 6 races we've had yet this season.
Yeah, it's been great actually after a pretty damn squib of a season last year. So it's good to have a great battle so far. There's more excitement towards the season for me as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It seems pretty epic, and Soumil and I can't wait to discuss this exciting topic that we have with you and with everyone tuning into this live stream.
Oh, yes. Should be fun. So before we go ahead, let me explain the whole segment to you. It's going to be very simple. The first half an hour or so, we're going to be speaking about our topic. More on that in 1 second. But the last 15 odd minutes, that is where we answer all the fan questions. And there's going to be a ton of them, as we always had. And the best part is, there are some amazing questions. So keep sending them in. There's a good chunk of time for that later on. The topic for today, the fun part that we have to discuss. Now, I know it's a bit of a hypothetical situation, this one, but what if Formula One had its season interrupted midway through? What if we saw 2020 all over again? Now, you might be wondering, it might take something really special. So, let's just say one fine day all the cars woke up and said, today we just don't want to race anymore. So, what do you do in a case like that one? Stupid, I know, but it is what it is. But let's discuss a situation like that. I mean, who could have foreseen the pandemic, right? Who could have foreseen what happened last year? But it still did. And that just gives us a very good reference point of what to expect if yet another Formula One season, in fact, was interrupted halfway through or was shortened some way down. So, on that note, guys, very firstly, I'll start with you on this one, Deepak. How many races do you expect to see this year? Because thankfully, the COVID restrictions have been opened up. The drivers are allowed not to wear the masks after the race ends. Things are becoming slightly easier, but again, there might be some instances where we might see cancellations of sorts where a deal just cannot be worked out properly.
Yeah, I think we've already lost Singapore. So, I think a lot of issues of the calendar will come towards the back end of the year, I guess. Races like Brazil, Mexico, Australia is very strict with the quarantine of 14 days. I'm not sure Formula One can afford the 14-day hotel quarantine and things like that. So, I think we might lose at least 2 or 3 of those. And Japan also looks, I don't know. Let's see how the Olympic goes. And Japan is one race that I'll also keep a watch out on whether that actually happens. So I think last year, from what was reported, we needed about 18 races to have a proper championship in terms of commercial TV revenues and stuff. So I think if we can get it anywhere between 18 to 20, I think that will be a good season for this year, I guess.
And what
my main worry will be Brazil.
That's a good point. Brazil, yeah. Things are looking really wild right there, but interestingly enough, they've moved the Copa America right there from Argentina by saying
Copa America, yes.
That's just amazing of them, isn't it?
So yeah, let's see
That's
if you can get. I mean, Mexico will be a crazy race if it happens with Sergio and Red Bull. So I hope it happens. But yeah, that's another one that will be that one we'll have to watch out for.
true. And the best part is Red Bull Racing are always fast in Mexico. What if Sergio Perez ends up winning that one? That's a question for later on. But what
Yeah.
are your thoughts, Kunal? 17, 18? I mean, I personally don't like the whole 23 race format myself. It just kind of takes away a lot from each single race. But how many do you think we'll end up with eventually?
You know, I must say, whether I like 23 races or not depends on the mood I have that morning or if I've done my yoga session that morning, right? Because it is pretty hectic to have 23 races, right? But at the same time, given just how much fun we are having this season, I would love to see 23 races happen, 23 rounds of Lewis versus Max and what Checo's able to do and Bottas is able to, and lots of storylines, right? But just taking forward from what you gentlemen have been saying, I think we'll end up with 18 or 20 races, to be honest. That's the number I think I'd go with. For example, we've started the season off already with a 3-week break because of the whole, shuffling between not having China and now, Canada not happening, which is why we're going to have a double header in Austria and so on, right? So like Dipak said, I suspect as well that it's going to be only towards the second half or even the second half of the second half of the season when a lot of these races will probably drop off or get replaced and so on. And guys, I really hope, I don't mind these double headers, but I lose my head if we have a double header in Abu Dhabi. Let's really pray that doesn't happen.
Oh my God. You can have 8 different variations of the track and the track is still boring.
Spot on. I mean,
It's just a football pitch. It's not a Formula One circuit.
exactly.
Yeah.
With no overtaking spots at all. Wonder why they made it. It's the shake money, but we'll be coming to shake money later on as well. It's a major point in this one. Because if the championship could be cut in half, you might get some rather serious implications from the Middle East. And that's not just one country we're talking about. There's multiple of them. But what I really have to wonder is how things will go out eventually. But before that, 1 second, small interruption, but it's something quite fun if you're watching this outside of India. Because guys, as you can see on your screen right now, we've got a partnership going on with Manscaped, the best in men's below the waist grooming products. And they've come on to the show with us. And they actually have provided a very easy way for you to try out their products. That is by using the code TRIMINSIDE. That's right. Trim Inside on their checkout if you live outside India, and you might get you will get a 20% discount plus free shipping on every single one of their purchases. So there's that. Check out the link below in the description for the code and to their webpage and go check it out, which reminds me of another thing that we have to discuss about. A Manscaped lawnmower moment of the entire season. Now, it's only been, 6 rounds that we've had so far, but there have been so many major crashes, so many major moments where we can look at it and go, oh, wait, that's a Manscaped lawnmower moment of the season. Which one has it been for you guys? I'll start with you, Kunal, this one.
Okay, I'll put it this way. One of the most obvious winners of every landscape lawnmower moment has been Nikita Mazepin, right? But I'm going to move away because it's obvious doesn't mean he gets the coveted prize of being the man who's had the lawnmower moment from the first 6 races. I think I'll go with Yuki Tsunoda. He's fast, he's furious, as we know on radio, right? He's one of those crash kids that Red Bull will have to nurture one more time. Remember they did that with Max Verstappen, and it's just as quickly as we jump onto the Tsunoda hype train, we jump off it, and like we saw what he did in Bahrain. He pulled off that overtake on, Fernando Alonso, scored his first points on debut, and suddenly everyone was like, here's the future, here's, who Red Bull will go for in case Max Verstappen goes somewhere else. And then he had those series of lawnmower moments pretty much every single race, right? And in Baku, he had the lawnmower moment in, Q3 of qualifying, but he sort of more than made up for it in the race as well. And as Franz Tost said, that Yuki was so fast around Baku that France was scared, thinking, how is it that this guy hasn't gone into the barriers yet? So I don't know if I'm on the hype train or not just yet. But yeah, I think Yuki Tsunoda clearly has put us in that moment, the Manscaped lawnmower moment for me.
And your thoughts, Deepak?
Pretty tough to choose. I'm not able to recollect the top of my head, but I think if it's like a decisive moment of the season for me so far, or something that actually impressed me was Sebastian Vettel's move on Gasly at Monaco. I mean, it came out of nowhere. You suddenly, after the first round of pit stops, he suddenly found a switch, and since then he's got a podium as well. And I hope it brings some change in fortune for Vettel because Vettel doing well is always good for Formula One, and he's kind of driver who's charming, who's erudite, who can speak well. I mean, off track, and it's just fun to see him do well. I mean, if he's not doing well, he's a pretty miserable driver on track. You don't know what you're going to get it, especially considering what happened at Bahrain. I mean, with him and Ocon. So that change of switch, I mean, I hope it continues. So for me, Vettel. But I mean, you could say Vettel's Ocon movement is a what do you call that? Sorry, I don't get it.
The Manscaped lawnmower moment.
Manscaped lawnmower moment, yeah. So he's changed that at least. No?
Exactly.
I think he's flipped it around. So for me, Vettel.
Maybe he spun it around. That's a rather poor
that's
choice of
that's a Mazepin thing.
Exactly.
Let's save that for Nikita.
Yeah. Now, typically, this is where Soumil will very slyly change the topic, move on to the next point, because he's like, yeah, I don't want to share my lawnmower moment, but Soumil, what's been yours?
It's not necessarily a lawnmower moment because it eventually, let's just say, caused more damage to barriers and egos than lawns. But Verstappen's crash in Baku, I cannot go beyond that. And the cause, well, how long has it been? Why am I checking this hand? I don't have a watch here. But it's been Monday, basically. It's been past Monday. It's been the whole week. It's Saturday today as we record it. We still don't have a proper, real explanation, per se, as to why it happened. Debris? Really? Is it really debris? I don't think it is. So let's just see what it is. But for me, that has to be Max's one. But when you come to think of it, on the overall perspective, has it really done much to the championship? Not much. It's caused a fun race, but we're exactly where we were before we started. So I think nothing ventured, nothing gained in that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only change that happened was constructors, which is fine. Drivers championship is where we're all so excited about, right? Like that's how we all remember years. Who won it in 96 and who won it in 98 and the likes, right? So but yeah, I'm glad I'm hoping that Pirelli are able to pull out the actual reason and not the corporate reason, right? About what happened in Bahrain, because it happened to two drivers, and I think we're all very lucky, including of course the drivers, that there are these cars which you can crash at those speeds and walk away and get back into the car the next day, or literally the next 10 minutes later, and drive off home if you need to be so.
Just some mind-blowing stuff.
But it happened at the same part of the track as well.
Exactly.
For both drivers. It happened at the same part of the track. So is it debris? It could be. Or is it about or to do with loading of the tires on the straights? We don't know. Let's see.
Well, interestingly enough, Pirelli actually reduced the tire pressures by 1 point from I think from 19 to 18 psi. And there was a bit of a weird thing where they came up with softer tires this year than they did in 2019. Now, of course, the reason behind that is softer racing. Softer tires means more degradation. You get to see more action, more pit stops usually. Still a one stop, but who knows which way it's going right now. But that's beyond the point right now. Right now, we have to discuss more about the season. I mean, if it is shortened, if ever it is, and let's just assume it is. Let's just assume that it ends halfway through. On the sporting side of things, it'll be a bit crazy, won't it? I mean, to imagine that the championship would end halfway through, or even be shortened down to, say, for instance, even 15 races for that matter. It'll be a bit too crazy to imagine which way things can go. So, what do you reckon, Dipak? In this case, which driver do you think will take the most races to get back to prove themselves in this case? Because there have been so many of them who have been struggling. Fernando Alonso, case in point, didn't quite have the best of starts. If a season is shortened, that could be a big damage to his reputation. If it is, of course. Hypothetical, this whole situation.
Okay, Alonso is touching 40, but the other main driver that I am looking forward, I'm worried about is Daniel Ricciardo. He's had no car time before the season, and he seems to be literally clueless. And I really wish this. I mean, I think he would want the season to go deep, so he could get as much mileage under his belt, sort out whatever issues, whether it's brakes or confidence or whatever. so that when the new rules kick in next year, he's right up there at the sharp with Lando. And I think McLaren would also need him to step up sooner than later in their fight with Ferrari in the constructors battle. I mean, McLaren need more of the constructors' money than Ferrari. Ferrari can afford to post to a fourth or fifth. I mean, it doesn't hurt their bank balances at all.
True.
McLaren probably would need to be really sharp in that battle.
And when you
I mean,
consider,
Daniel Ricciardo will be one.
and exactly, and when you consider that McLaren were in a financial crisis a year before, it means even more for them, right, to see Daniel Ricciardo do well.
Yeah, I mean, they paid a bomb to him, so he better return the favor to them as well.
Exactly. But I'll actually digress from this for a second and ask you this question, Deepak. Why do you think that Ricciardo is taking so much time when someone like Sergio Perez, who's supposedly not as fast as Ricciardo in many people's popular eye, why has he adapted so well so quickly to Red Bull? I mean, he said that he'll be ready with the car in 5 races. Here he is in the 6th race winning a Grand Prix. Ricciardo is just not got a hang of it.
Yeah, I think interestingly, Ricciardo had a similar problem when he went to Renault as well. He took nearly a half a season to get. I mean, there the issue was simply braking, but here it doesn't seem to be only braking that's where that he's lacking. There seems to be a general. He's not able to get around the characteristics of the car. So it's starting to becoming a trend for Ricciardo. I hope he can turn it around like he did with Renault. But yeah, that's suddenly you find small chinks in armory. I mean, when he left Red Bull, he was pretty much on the top of the game. He was a proper A-lister along with Hamilton that time. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think he'll have to dig deep there. So yeah, because it seems to be a small trend developing there. He's taking time to settle in. I think the preseason was also very, very small, like 3-4 days of testing. So that shouldn't have, I mean, that probably hurt him as well there. So yeah, that's what I think.
No, is that the same picture?
Yeah, I think it's tough to. Yeah, it is. It is in fact the same thing that I've got in mind. And he actually had to step out of the car last weekend and said, maybe a triple header is what I need to get into the groove of things. It just shows how much track time he's sort of wanting to have to sort out these issues and so on. And, interesting insight about the fact that he took time to settle in at Renault as well. And, initially back then we thought that Nico Hülkenberg had the measure of him. And then when Daniel Ricciardo ended up settling down, we saw how he sort of pulled away from, Nico Hülkenberg at that point as well, right? So I'm pretty excited to see what actually becomes of Daniel Ricciardo through the long season. And, clearly him being the one big surprise, that in the first 6 races of a driver who struggled more than we would have expected. Because, for somebody like Fernando Alonso, he's been away from Formula One for 2 years. So you may, and like you said, he's touching 40 and so on, right? So we may give him a little longer rope, right? But somebody like Ricciardo, it just pains everyone, that, Daniel Ricciardo, such a nice guy. What a lovely character. The least he should be is matching Lando Norris. That's how we all see it. In the case of Fernando, because of his 2 titles and the fact that he's a veteran and all, we're all like, he should do, typical Fernando Alonso type races. Like, for example, what he did in Baku, right? So I think clearly, Daniel Ricciardo is one of them. The other would, if I may, just pull out one more and say another driver who needs a good number of races to sort of prove himself. There are several more of them, right? But I would say I would go with somebody like, a Mick Schumacher as well. So he's been good. He's been quicker than Nikita Mazepin. But I don't think that's the barometer we're all looking for. We want him to do what George Russell does. Consistently take that car into a Q2 or closer to the Williams. And he's done that a couple of times with Nicholas Latifi yet. But I think somebody like a Mick would also benefit from an as long or as deep a season as possible.
Exactly.
Another driver I can think of is Yuki Tsunoda himself. I mean,
exactly.
We've spoken about him already, but Yuki will really like to have a long season so that he could. I mean, he's moved to Italy. We've read that he's moved to Italy, so we like to see him show what he can develop through the season. With a knife hanging over his head, knowing when the season doesn't get. So I mean, he could do well with a big season, with a long season. gets into his groove. Otherwise, you never know what will happen at the Red Bull Academy there.
Yeah, yeah.
But do you think he'll get the long season? That's the main thing. Because they didn't have that same level of patience with many other drivers. Okay, it's Toro Rosso. They're not as harsh on Toro Rosso drivers, but
Sorry.
when you consider that Yuri Vips is coming along the line, when you consider that Jehan is coming here as well, I know Yuki outperformed both of them last year in Formula 2, but still, you can never tell with Helmut Marko, can you?
Yeah. I think they. I don't think they have a driver ready to step in unless they go back to Danny Kvyat.
Hmm.
That's the recurring theme that you go back. So I don't know. I don't think. I
Fall
think.
back.
Yeah, I think with Honda there for at least this year, and they might need some help to at least the start of next year. So I think Yuki is good to go for at least one full season,
Hmm.
unless and until he really, tails off as a really poor run of races. So I think he'll
Yeah.
stay there, but he would like to have a longer season before the new rules kick in, so that he gets used to the team and basically the feel of Formula One. I mean, he needs to know the tracks as well. So yeah, I think he'll be better served at a full season of 20 races at least.
I hope he certainly gets that. But one driver that we have to talk about is Lewis Hamilton. Now, at the start of the year, it seemed like Hamilton was incredible. And there have been so many instances where we have come out, like the Portuguese GP, like the Spanish GP, like the Bahrain Grand Prix, when we said that is where you see Lewis Hamilton earning every single penny of his immense salary. There's a reason why it's 2 or 3 times more than what Valtteri Bottas gets paid. But recently, a couple of errors here and there, Mercedes have lacked in that aspect. How much pressure would you think that they would be heading into 2022 if, say, for instance, 2021 is shortened out, but if anything happens, they're clearly right now not on the front foot as they have been since 2014. That could be a big psychological effect for them heading into the next year.
Uh, I'm not sure. I think Hamilton's too good a driver to. The length of the season is not going to really affect him. I think that's not their bigger worry is to get the car in shape and get the best out of their car. So I think they will be focusing more on the development side. I think Lewis has not been his best so far. I mean, he's made a lot of errors so far this season compared to Max. But I think in terms of the length affecting him, I'm not sure. I think he'll be. I don't think that's something that he'll be thinking too much about it.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point. The one thing that I'm concerned about is at the moment teams are planning, drivers are planning, everyone is saying, oh, the championship is a long fight, it's still early days, and everyone is of course planned it in their heads psychologically, thinking we are going to have 23 races in this battle, right? And suddenly when that truncates itself, let's assume if we lose 4 races or we're just unable to schedule it, right? That's like 100 points less, right, that they're going to be fighting for, at least in the driver's title. And that'll be interesting because both the drivers, Lewis and Max, have made mistakes in the title battle. Lewis, of course, hasn't been pressurized as much in the last several years as he's been pressurized this year. And I know all the Vettel fans will get up and throw some bricks at me for saying that. And Max is for the first time fighting a title battle with the might of Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. So in a way, it's going to be about reducing as many mistakes as you go, because you don't know when the checkered flag is actually going to drop. And yes, Liberty Media makes money, Formula One makes money if they host races. We've seen how this whole television model in itself is driving the sport and the revenues since last year. So they will attempt to have all the 23 as possible, but like you pointed out, Soumil, it's a hypothetical situation, but something that I see that could become a reality in the sporting and the commercial context of things in Formula One. So, championship battle, definitely the stakes are only going to rise with as many races dropping off. And I'll also put it this way, like Singapore, was it a Red Bull racing track or was it a Mercedes favored track? Like imagine if Monaco was cancelled and Monaco being an outlier in the Mercedes scope of things, even these tracks dropping off will offer those outlier driven fluctuations as well. And that's something that will also come into play. So again, this is psychologically in terms of what the teams would be thinking of.
Yeah, just taking on from where Kunal left, I think we briefly touched upon how Mexico is good for Red Bull. I mean, when we spoke about potential races that could be dropped, like Australia and Mexico, that's two races where Red Bull are expected to do well. I mean, based on the form book that we've seen, so that's huge for someone like Max Verstappen. I mean, Max Verstappen has pretty much dominated Mexico since it came back on the F1
Yeah.
calendar. Oh yeah, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, I mean, Red Bull would ideally. My understanding is, I think Red Bull would want to go at least to places like Mexico and Australia. Definitely, they know they have. I mean, also the thing is, Red Bull is the fastest car right now. So, I mean, they have a certain inbuilt advantage. So, the longer it goes, I mean, they are going to be in a slightly better position than a team that is trying to catch up at the same time also trying to shift focus towards the next year's car. So someone like Mercedes, they have to find a delicate balance there. How do you catch up and focus next year? Red Bull can afford to slightly slacken this year focus because they have an inbuilt 2/10 or 3/10, whatever that advantage is. Someone like Red Bull would want to have a longer calendar.
That's a good point. That's a very good point here. So, Kunal, a question for you on this one. You've been a part of the racing team. You've been a part when rules have changed major time as well. So, just when do you start putting your focus to next year? And when do you start saying, all right, doesn't matter where we are this year, we're going to concentrate our efforts onto the big rule changes because maybe that's where the longer term gains are. And Force India, I think, were quite good at that. Eventually, it was those big rule changes after 2013 was when we saw that resurgence, not a resurgence, but the first surge of popularity in Force India and the way they performed after that. So, what is it like? And what do you think will be going on in the Mercedes and the Red Bull office right now? Because they already might have planned for this one. So, what steps do you think are they going to take in this?
Soumil, I think 1st of January is when they opened up for development for 2022 regulations. And I think 1st of January, 1 minute past 12 o'clock in the night, the teams would have been at it, literally at literally the first minute of the new year, given just so much emphasis is on rule changes to shake up the sport. And, typically when teams approach changes of rules, you want to start with a very strong baseline. It's okay to build innovations as the rules evolve, like we've seen. Like, if you see 2014, 15, 16, and now you see 2020 and 2021, it's taken Red Bull literally 7 years to get into the title fight, right? So the one thing teams would definitely want to do is build a very strong baseline that they can further themselves upon, when the rules change. But that said, there's also the complexity of, the budget cap. So how much do you spend on this year versus how much do you spend on next year and so on, which I think is going to just, become an increasingly important factor as the sport evolves. And I'm of all the people most pleased with these budget caps because it sort of keeps teams' developments, expenses in check. Teams are not spending 300 and 400 million dollars to run campaigns like they used to literally just 10 years ago. So that's something that we'd love to see. And again, talking more on a little bit on a technical point, every team would have had a program of things to develop in 2021 while keeping focus on 2022 as well. And much as teams like Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, and everyone who's engaged in a battle for the constructors championship and the several positions below that, it's easy to say we're going to switch focus onto the other car, but you also need to maximize standings this year to get the money that you sort of should earn for finishing higher in the championship. So a truncated season, if at all that happens, so you can no longer plan, okay, I'm going to have a Singapore specific wing that I'm going to debut, which I'll use, in other circuits like, say, Suzuka as well, if those two circuits are just going to fall off the calendar. So it's going to be that sort of a technical challenge as well. And again, I go back to the word baseline. If you have a strong baseline with a car that works across a multiple range of tracks, it's just something that delivers, throughout without needing such spikes and innovations.
Yeah, exactly. And if we do have a shortened season as well, we won't be able to bring you as many competitions and as many prediction league races. So, which means that you might have to be a bit more adept at predicting them a bit early on. But that's a joke that I tried, failed eventually. But hey, what's more interesting is that if it actually does not go long, it kind of takes away the charm of it, right? The charm of fighting back. Now, only yesterday we saw a good example of that in the Roland Garros semi-final between Tsitsipas and Zverev, where Tsitsipas won the first 2 sets. Zverev fought back from 2 sets down to bring it to 2-all. Eventually, the fifth set went in the way of the Greek player, and he was the one in the final. But you get to think that if it goes long, you get to see those sort of fight backs from the teams, which is what you love in sport, right? You don't want to see any boxing match end with just one punch. You want to see the other competitor fight back and then see something special. And 23 races is a bit too long, I think. Maybe 21 is an ideal number for that. But that's for later on. What we should speak about right now is the money, the commercial aspect of it. As Kunal mentioned early on, the TV deals were a bit of a special thing that we saw in 2020, a bit of a unique situation that we had last year because of a shortened season. And this has meant that we are able to go to tracks like Mugello, tracks like Portimao because of that. But I'm really curious about the financial side of things. So which way does it go? Of course, teams and drivers are paid for the whole season. Most of the employees on the support staff or the technical side of things are paid a monthly salary and so on and so forth. But do you think Formula One has learned from 2020, and would they have added any sort of clauses or contracts which said that, okay, if the year is shortened by any means whatsoever, I mean, you can't focus on a pandemic, but still, if for whatever happens, the season is cut down, you can only get paid, let's say, by the proportion of the races we've done. So let's say 65% of the calendar is done, so you get 65% of the salary. Do you guys reckon something like that might have happened? Because at this stage, when you know that anything can happen, you might just need a contingency plan, Dipak. You need to have that sort of way out for yourself.
You can probably do for the top executives who can afford to take that hit, but what about the other employees who have mortgages to pay? So that'd be interesting. And this is where I
Okay, I think Deepak's having some issues with his network, but I can till he joins back, I'll just take over the point, Soumil, if that's okay.
No worries.
And and I think Deepak was on the right track when he said that people have mortgages to pay and so on. And I think typically from teams, you have people who
can
are...
help me out in this aspect of things.
Yes, Deepak,
Yes.
Are you back?
Here he is.
There you go. I have to say you're on mute.
The classic
Yeah. Is
online
it fine
thing.
now? Yeah, is it fine now?
Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect.
Yes.
Oh, I think I just realized what happened. I was on my mobile hotspot and someone had made a call to me. So it cut off. The internet got cut off.
No,
Yeah,
it's okay.
what are they saying? Yeah, I just wanted to ask Kunal on this. How does when you reduce the number of races, the pie obviously becomes smaller. Now, how does it affect the smaller teams actually? Because my assumption is the smaller teams would want to have more number of races, especially considering there are a lot of races that didn't pay much last year to Liberty Media. So the money from last year is going to be paid out this year. So they're already taking a hit this year. And if again they get another hit this year, how does it going to affect the midfield teams, especially the Alfa Romeos, the Haas, Alfa Tauris, Alpine? Alpine has a big board, but still I'm not sure they are at the level of Mercedes or Ferrari. So how does it work that for those small teams? Do they take the hit so that they can spare? I mean, they don't need to spend so much resources this year in terms of travel and the spare parts and things like that, or do they want to have a bigger calendar so that the pie is bigger in terms of the total money that FOM or Liberty Media raises? So how does it work?
So, it's always a dichotomy because Haas is a great example in this case, right? Haas knows that 2020 and 2021 are impacted. They know they have a bad car. And Gunther Steiner has been as honest saying, we are not developing the 2021 car. We've got rookies. Let them learn what Formula One is all about. Happy to give them the slowest car on the grid if that's how we end up being, right? And that said, it's teams are paid prorated by Formula One, and their expenses are, of course, prorated, but at the same time, they have full-time staff, that they need to pay for. But drivers and top executives and so on, they typically go on a per race fee as well. So long as the math matches that, hey, going for a race, going for any race costs me X million, but the return from Formula One could be, Y million. Then if that difference is not too much and so on, is where the math starts kicking in. And this is also how sponsorship contracts work, because a sponsor will pay for exposure for 23 races, and suddenly you truncate that down to 20, then the money becomes available prorated. So commercially, the sport will, of course, have bigger questions that they will be answering in the boardrooms than, they would be, it's easier to get those answers, or rather, it's more difficult to get those answers than what you would see drivers fighting on track for, right? And luckily enough, a lot of these, minnows, as we call them, Alfa Romeo and Alpha Tauri and the likes, they anyway operate on very shoestring budgets. They are nowhere close to what the budget cap is, including an Aston Martin and so on. So long as that math works out, they are happy to go racing and they're happy to make the money as it goes. But what happens is Liberty Media will come under a lot of pressure because it is television money, and we've seen Liberty Media have rejigged their finances last year to keep the teams, keep them in funding so that they remain on track and they don't sort of fall off the grid, right? So the one big positive this year is at least we started on time. We've got 6 races in, and they've seen how the whole model that FIA and Liberty Media have put in about the whole the bio bubble concept. It is delivering races. It is keeping drivers or team personnel who've tested positive. It is keeping them out of the paddock and so on. So they will be hoping that within this bubble itself, that they are able to get in as many races as it comes. And eventually, as long as you're earning more per race than you're spending, teams will be happy to go racing.
Now, this brings a question. So, like 2020, if any season is shortened, we know that Liberty Media has to step in. They have to come up with some sort of a compensation package. And let's just say many teams did not really have the best of years financially last year. Of course, it's a given, right? Revenues were cut down. Their payments, the central payments from Formula One were not as high as they usually were. What do you reckon, Dipak? Do you think that many teams will go to the bankruptcy office just to get themselves registered? Say someone like a Haas or an Alfa Romeo in that case. Because quite frankly, the Haas has shown tendencies to leave. And Gene Haas has openly said that if this thing doesn't work out for me, I might just pack my bags and go home. I don't have any emotional connect with it. And when you consider that it takes quite a while for any team to recover financially from a year like that one, what do you reckon? Which teams could go to the bankruptcy office next? Because that's a real threat if the season is shortened down.
For me, the biggest concern more than Haas is Sauber, Alfa Romeo, because we don't know what's the status of the title sponsorship, and that's not yet been renewed. I mean, I know it's not probably a big 50 million thing; it'd be 10 to 12, 20 million, but it's still a significant amount of branding, and in terms of a pedigree brand, heritage brand that brings sponsors. So that's the team that I'm really focused and worried about, because with Haas. Thanks to Nikita, Daddy might pay for that. Daddy might want to, give a birthday gift to the boy there. So I think they'll probably survive a year or two, as long as Nikita can show some semblance of a promise there. But Sauber Alfa Romeo is a team that because we don't know much about their Swedish owners, that Longbro Finance or whoever owns the team, we don't know much about. They're not very front and center. So I think that's a team that we'll have to watch out for. Alpha Tauri, I mean, Red Bull is there, so they'll take care of it. Aston Martin similarly, Daddy Stroll is there, and it's a big brand, so they are in here for a long haul. So Alpine again, Alpine is a tricky situation, but since it's just the first year they have brought this brand, I think they'll stick it out for about 2-3 years definitely. I hope that happens. But for me, Alfa Romeo is a team that's one to watch out for.
And what about McLaren? I know we're digressing on this point just a little bit, but McLaren recently had to mortgage, and I think, no, that's not the exact term for it. They had to lease and
sale. Sale and lease back.
Exactly.
Sale and lease back.
Sale and lease back of their McLaren Technology Center. Had to raise a few bonds, had to sell a few bonds to raise some money. Basically, that's what the scenario was. And it was a very, very thin financial budget for McLaren last year. And Zach Brown clearly said that it was unprecedented in their history, at least since McLaren became a global brand. Do you think they'll be on the edge too, before we move on to the next point?
I'm not sure. I mean, they've committed to a Formula Extreme racing or something
Yeah.
recently now. So I think they should be safe. I'm not very sure. I don't think they will commit to another project outside of Formula One if they are not convinced of what they have the enough resources to concentrate on their main focus area, which is the Formula One racing. So I think McLaren should be safe. I mean, it depends on whether they have the resources to fight a Red Bull or Mercedes or to survive. I think survival and being a midfield team or top three, top four is fine, but whether they have it in it to take the fight to Mercedes and Red Bull, that's and Ferrari obviously, and that we'll have to wait and see. I think Kunal might know much
Yeah,
more
yeah,
about
and
that.
I'll add to what Deepak said. So I think the worst in terms of survival is probably over, right? For all the teams, 2020 was a bigger scare than say 2021 would be for them, and I don't think anyone's going to go through the whole bankruptcy route and so on. They will keep reaching finances, keep getting investors because it's they're also within a new business model because during the Bernie era, it was all about spend, 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 and you keep going quicker. But Liberty Media has, with the budget cap, with all the controls they're putting in place, they're trying to make the businesses far more lucrative, right? And that is what the teams are also wanting to hold out for. That we make so many millions, but we spend only such few millions, and that's what they're trying to show as they're a positive business entity that they're trying to attract investors for. So I think the worst is thankfully over. No team will leave the grid because of financial reasons, and thankfully even a truncated season will not throw us down that road. At least that's my reading.
Interesting
I
stuff.
think the only other team that was in a precarious situation was Williams. Now
Williams,
that they
yeah.
have secured new investors, I think they should be safe as well. So,
Exactly.
True, absolutely.
Let's certainly hope so. Let's certainly hope that that is the case. Nobody likes to see Formula One teams dropping off, and let's hope we don't have too many Formula One teams coming in as well, because I don't think that's what we need at this stage. But that's something for later on. What we shall focus on right now is the technical side of things. How will that be affected? And yes, only in a couple of minutes after we wrap up the technical side, there's some amazing questions that we've got to answer. And so many people have thrown in your questions. And it's so good to see Anubhav, Gunbit, and the likes always come on the stream. So thank you guys for that. Just a couple of seconds. Now, the technical side of things. We might have a few races in 2021 if it's shortened down. Which teams do you reckon might want a full season the most, in your opinion, Deepak? We've already discussed that McLaren needs some money. McLaren needs this fight to go deep. What about other teams, in your opinion?
in terms of technical resources, I mean, right now only two teams are competing, so it's going to boil down to only Red Bull and Mercedes in terms of how where they are in the championship at that point of time where we have to think about the races which are dropping off. If Red Bull is ahead, they might say, okay, right, let's stop it, let's call it a cruise here. Or if and Mercedes might say, no, we'll go for longer, we'll try to fight back. So I think only though in terms of technical resources and who wants to fight, I think it will come down to only these two teams. The other teams where you have a constructors battle might be interested a bit, but I don't think the incentive is great enough for them to sustain a fight over a longer period of time. Say it's a McLaren versus Ferrari or an Alpine versus AlphaTauri. The fifth and sixth, you will have maybe a couple of million here and there. So I don't think they are going to be too bothered about how many races they're left, whether they're finishing fifth or sixth. But obviously the title and the crown is bigger issue. So I think it's just going to boil down to what Red Bull and Mercedes feel. I think it will come down to them as only them.
Yeah, I think that's well said. With the title fight again, like we spoke about the whole balance between this year and the next year, and I believe I like the situation that we are in this year, right? We saw that crash between Bottas and Russell at Imola, and suddenly everyone was saying it costs millions to repair this car, and it's affecting Mercedes's budget, for example, right? And Toto Wolff said maybe the cost of that crash is what we will pay for later in the season. Williams, we saw, are using 2020 front wings for different reasons, performance and commercial as well. So I think it's a problem that teams have never had. right? Or a lot of teams have never had. And it's going to be good to see how they balance spends for this year versus spends for next year as well. Because clearly the medium to long term view would be to make sure that you start off next year on a good footing. You're getting a white canvas to start drawing afresh from. But also, like we've said before, that how high you finish this year will also impact how much money you get next year. And trust Formula One teams to find solutions to such problems. As complicated, as technical, as data driven as it may be. So
now, directly, first up, we've got an amazing question that links in beautifully with this very point that we discussed right now. It's one from Gambit. He's asked, do you think a shortened F1 season would sabotage the growth of F1 to new markets and fans? What is your take on that, Dipak?
I couldn't get your question. Sorry, come again.
So it was, do you think a shortened F1 season would sabotage the growth of Formula One to new markets and fans? I think it's an interesting question.
Interesting, but I don't think it will sabotage per se. The thing is, more number of countries you go, you just open it up to a bigger fan base. So you ideally want as many races as it is feasible, humanly possible to have it. But in terms of having a huge impact on the negative, I'm not sure, because as long as the title fight is interesting, I think the Formula One fans are going to tune in. However, number of the races are there, they are just going to tune in and watch what's happening. So I don't think there'll be a huge hit, but obviously, yeah, the ideal scenario is you want to go to different places, you want to open up the sport to newer audiences. So that is that. To an extent, it might hit, but I don't think sabotage is probably a stronger word, really.
Same. That's exactly my take on it. And your thoughts, Kunal?
It's a very interesting question, and I say this because there are several things that actually market Formula One to new fans. So one is Drive to Survive. Thankfully, we are going to have Drive to Survive next year. Even out of the 6 races we've had, if they were to say no more, no more racing in 2021, again, it's not. We know that we are racing it at Paul Ricard in a week's time, but we will have Drive to Survive, and Drive to Survive is bringing in loads of people into watching Formula One. The one thing that a truncated season will impact is this whole battle between Max and Lewis, and that is something people will want to tune in, even if you had 50 races in the year. Those battles are what would bring in all the fans, wheel-to-wheel action, race strategy action, and so on. And of course, the fewer number of races means fewer number of battles or bouts, as we would call it, right? So that is definitely an impact that I would say that would have, instead of seeing them fight over 23, if we seeing them fight over 17, 18, or 20 races. And then, like Dipak said, the point is that the more circuits we go to, the more number of newer markets we are going to open. We saw Vietnam, of course, drop off for all weird reasons. There is the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix as well. That's happening later on in the year. And then last year we saw Zandvoort call off the Dutch Grand Prix for, again, all the right reasons as well. So there will be impacts on certain parameters. But again, I think the biggest parameter is Drive to Survive. As long as we have a Drive to Survive, newer fans will keep getting added on to watching Formula One.
Question for all of you guys in the chat. What do you think Formula One will do after Drive to Survive? Because there's only so long its novelty will last. What happens then? What becomes their primary approach to marketing? I want to know your takes on that. But while we do get more things on that topic, there's some other interesting questions coming in as well. One from Pratham, who sent this a bit early on, but I think it's a good time to answer this one. Can Williams become an Alpine B team after George Russell's exit? According to Merck, Aston and Ferrari, Haas. And what do you think about the recent management shuffle with respect to Roberts leaving the team? That's their team principal. Then Guan Yu Zhou can make his debut to line up alongside Latifi because, of course, he's an Alpine Academy driver. I don't think Williams is heading in that direction, are they? The new investors are quite clearly backing the idea of being a standout team, being a standalone outfit, and apparently they've respected Williams' decision to be a constructor. So I don't know that's going to happen, Deepak. I think they're still going to be an entity of their own.
Aren't they tied to a Mercedes contract for next year at least? Next couple of years?
Yeah, they are,
yes.
So I don't see that happening there. They have a proven engine behind the back. At least they need a set of constant. At least they know what they're getting from Mercedes engine. The Alpine engine, is it Is it? Probably it's not the slowest of the four engines that we have right now. So it wouldn't make much sense for Williams to trade a benchmark engine to an engine that's not up to the mark. And you don't want to change a lot of things when you're trying to reshuffle and reorganize and restructure your team. You need some kind of reference point. So I think Mercedes gives that a good reference point in that case. And they've had a long relationship since 2014. I don't think that's going to happen per se. I think Alfa Romeo might be a better option for Alpine to invest into
Exactly.
than Williams if Alfa doesn't continue the tie-up next year.
Which could be a realistic possibility because Alfa Romeo are not quite. I mean, I wouldn't know what goes on in the meetings, but they've got the least recall of all the big manufacturers in Formula One right now. So who knows which way that could be going? That's a very interesting take. But just briefly, we can take a minute out for this one. Do you think a loan system could work out well, like we saw with Red Bull and Renault and the likes, where Williams, let's say, don't have to take on pay drivers, but at least they can loan on a junior from the Alpine Academy. And there are tons of juniors in the Alpine Academy who could do a world of good to Williams in terms of a driving standpoint. At least slightly better than Latifi without being too harsh.
And Latifi also saves money.
That's true, but the Alpine team could also say like, okay, here's a few $1 million, not a few $1 million, that'd be a bit too much, but XYZ sum for you to put in my junior in your car. Give him a shot. You don't have to pay him. We're the ones doing it already. It ensures that Renault Alpine at this stage that they have some sort of succession path towards their Formula One seat. And Williams, they don't have to pay to get a superstar driver. They don't have to pay to get any young prospect. They're getting it on their own. And yeah, they're not getting a pay driver either. So it's like they're getting decent quality and they're getting some funds out of it as well. That might be a prospect that they might want to explore. Potentially.
Right? Oh, I thought Kunal was going here.
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, I mean, Williams, they're in a position where they can literally say, hey, you guys have a lot of junior drivers. We don't mind some money to put them in the car. But I must say, Dan Ticktum, also associated with Williams,
yep.
I'd love to see him in Formula One. He's been doing fantastic in Formula 2 this season. And, another very mercurial character, as we call it, Soumil.
Yeah.
He was of course let go by Red Bull, but he's got the measure of a lot of the Red Bull junior drivers in Formula 2 this season. So, but these are all the economics that have been operating in Formula One for the teams over the years. Either you take the engine and get a reduced cost, or you get money to actually put the engine or a driver and so on. And I think the key point is if Alpine believe they need a strong reference team. Like they had McLaren last year as a reference, right? But from this year, they're going alone. And, I've all the press conferences I've sat through, there have been mixed talks. There's been talk of, yes, we need a reference point. And then now suddenly it's switched to actually, we don't need a reference point. So it all depends on what the management thinks. And, like you guys said, there has been a shakeup of management there as well. So, teams tying up at the bottom of the grid will always make it interesting from a financial as well as a talent point of view, right? And loaning drivers is great, but I think Williams know somewhere that if they have Russell that goes, they can't rely on Latifi leading the team forward. So it'll be crucial to see who they end up having out there as well. And we are talking of shorter seasons, and if that happens, which driver could be impacted? I think Valtteri Bottas could be impacted, because he's had disastrous luck this season and so on. But yes, we've discussed drivers and we've discussed this. Let's take the next question, Soumil.
Yes, one from Gambit. This is a good one. He always sends in good questions, mate. Thank you for following us so fervently. It's always a pleasure to see that. He's asking, guys, after the Merc domination of the past 7 years, how has this season been as a journalist to report on Formula One? Dipak, this must be crazy, right? Because the last few years were a bit dull, let's put it that way, in terms of a championship battle. But the energy of this year just feels so special.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what I said. Last year was pretty damp, in terms of excitement. And frankly, I tuned out of a lot of races. I just couldn't find the same kind of excitement to follow it religiously. I did watch the races and qualifying sessions, but I didn't follow the practice. I didn't follow probably even a couple of quality sessions. I skipped because I know what's going to happen there. But this year it's been really exciting. I'm tuning to every free practice and seeing every race simulation runs and on the live timing app. I record the timings and see what's happening. It's just so exciting to finally have a battle. I mean, we had a quasi battle in 2017 and 18, at least the first half of the season with Vettel and Ferrari and Mercedes in those 2 years. But since then, it's been pretty damp. So I think I'm very excited. And I finally, after a long time, I wrote something on Max Verstappen as well recently for the Daily. So yeah, I mean, it made me get back into the groove of covering Formula One more religiously, to put it that way. Yeah, and I hope there will be more to write about as well as we go through the season.
So many fun stories, so many fun things that are happening, right? And for us as well, Kunal, on Pits to Podium and the Inside Line F1 podcast, every single episode, just recording every single one of them before that, there's just this buzz and excitement that, okay, there's so much to speak about this time out. And this means that we are coming up with some quite exciting content as well this whole year.
Yeah, and the flip side of a shortened season means lesser races on television, which means more live streams for us. So that's definitely, one of those inversely proportional relationships out here. But yes, it's I think, for example, everyone tuning in from Norway, you would have noticed we've actually upped our television content from on VIA Sport from this year as well. So when you have a battle and you've seen two different teams going at it, and P1 has a battle of two teams, P3 has a battle of two teams, P5 has a battle of, I think, 3 teams or 4 teams, and then there is, of course, the ones trying to be P8 out there. So within each of these segments that the teams have fallen into, there is a battle somewhere or the other to talk about. And it's like Dipak said, there is just so much more excitement, and you want to track more about what's happening in the free practice sessions and how it's impacting qualifying and the races and so on.
Just some amazing stuff. There's a fun question from Anubhav. Indian business tycoons should also buy an Indian F1 team. Maybe Tata, Reliance could be owners. Adani could also join the party. And he's come up with the name as well. It's the Range Rover Jaguar Reliance F1 team. It's just some amazing stuff.
They'll stick in a Geo somewhere.
They'll stick in Geo somewhere. and they'll make the drivers do the Geo Dandanadan dance as well, which is a bit insane. And have a Geo sleeve patch in every single driver's car. That suit that is, but there's a possibility though. I mean, commercially, now it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to come in at this very stage, but numbers are growing in India, and we are seeing more fans follow more eagerly. And if Jio or Reliance or Tata ever want to go more global, this is their way out.
Yeah, but I think you need an Indian driver definitely there. At least someone who's closer to the door, someone like Jahan. You need someone without an Indian driving face, and it's quite difficult to generate the kind of excitement. I mean, Force India for all. I mean, they're probably one of the best teams that operated for the amount of money they had, but having an Indian driver would have made a huge difference in terms of growing the sport in India, even as a test driver. They had a sound business plan, and they just employed the 2 best drivers they could afford.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not begrudging that, but having some Indian driver is a must for an Indian team to generate that kind of buzz and take it to the next level. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense for them as well. Unless and until you're as you said, Jaguar, they have a huge worldwide market, then it makes a difference. But if it's out of passion, if an Indian business tycoon is doing it out of passion, he will definitely need an Indian face to be behind the wheel.
Well, one of them was, and let's just say, started well, seemed to be going well for a while, didn't quite end up in the best way, did it, Kunal?
No, it didn't. But I'm going to add a marketing spiel out here, right? I remember back in time, the South Indian superstar Ajit ended up driving in the Formula LGB or yeah, and that made more noise and brought in more attention to Indian motorsport than Naren and Karun put together. I mean, nothing against the two gentlemen. I love what they've done for Indian motorsport. But that's if an Indian team was to be made, I would recommend putting a Virat Kohli or maybe a Sachin Tendulkar in the car and doing demonstration runs. Like Red Bull has done with the likes of Tom Cruise and so many other celebrities, right? But I suspect the economics are easy to make work or easier now than before with all the controls that Liberty Media has put in. It's just the ambition, it's just the desire. For example, what Vijay Mallya had, and I was pretty close to that story for several years, about 6 years myself, right? And if a Mukesh Ambani or a Gautam Adani wish to do that and they want to go global with what they're doing, I'm sure F1 can have more teams out there, right?
Yeah. And F1 would like to have an Indian team, definitely. They'll be more than happy to have an Indian investor there. They'll roll out the red carpet for any Indian businessman who's willing to cough up 150 million a year.
Yeah.
And honestly, that would be so incredible. I mean, if you want to have celebrities doing show runs, get Hrithik Roshan already. He can drive on the streets as well in a Formula One car. Whatever. That movie was a farce, whatever it was. But hopefully,
without a helmet, wasn't it?
Without I remember. Exactly. Don't ask. I could start a rant around the length of this episode about that movie, but that's beyond the point. What we should focus on is one final question on the YouTube chat. And it's a final question that is pertaining to some news that has come in just a couple of moments before we started this episode. It's that apparently the rumors are running wild that George Russell could be announced for Mercedes, not alongside Bottas, that is, alongside Lewis Hamilton for next year at Silverstone. And now here's a thought from Anubhav on this one. George would throw a party at Silverstone if he gets a permanent promotion. Bottas would go to Williams probably if there's a mid-season swap. And he's also asked, imagine Virat driving an Indian team. Half of India's cricket fans would come attracted like the North Pole and the South Pole if Virat is a co-owner. I mean, who knows? It's a bit too much for Virat to be a co-owner of Formula One. It's far too costly, but hey, I mean, we can all dream, right, someday. But yeah, there's that. And he's also added another point on that. Just imagine that Mercedes declare on British Grand Prix that George is promoted. What would be next for Bottas? Will we get a season turned upside down if Russell joins and sets up on fire? So this brings us on to a couple of points. Firstly, will Mercedes pull the trigger? Will they make Bottas? Will they give Bottas a demotion and send him down to Williams halfway through the year? And if not, do you think it's the right thing for them to do even for next year, for that matter? I think this is the final one we have to take because we're running short of time. But what are your thoughts on this, Kunal? Do you think that they are gutsy enough to make that move in the half-tier Mercedes? Because they're losing points in the Constructors' title now at last.
They are. And, if we were to try and attribute where they're losing, points to, it's not entirely down to Valtteri Bottas' talent. It's down to luck. And he's just somehow had shitty luck every passing season. Again, it's not to say that he's as talented as Lewis Hamilton. Lewis is clearly able to pull a gear on him with much ease, when he needs to do that. And I say this when, you see what Lewis was able to do against Nico Rosberg, for example. It was tougher for Lewis to pull away. I don't see a mid-season swap happening. I don't think that's the kind of team Mercedes has, built themselves to be. I also don't see a George Russell spending a fourth season with Williams. Definitely. I don't see that happening either. So either they'll find an arrangement for him at another, midfield team where he's able to fight, or they will just promote him to the Mercedes Formula One team. And then, of course, what about Valtteri Bottas? Could a team like Williams bring him back? Because I said, Latifi, again, wouldn't be somebody who would be able to lead the team at this early stage in his career, right? Or maybe Bottas just does what most Finns have done before, leave the sport and go rallying. And that's something he's spoken about, before as well, where he said he could just take to rallying and maybe make a comeback like Kimi did a few years later. Again, all options on the table, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think Mercedes will shunt Bottas down to Williams this year. I mean, I think they will have a certain level of gratitude to what he has done. I mean, he's been very close to Lewis Hamilton in terms of outright pace, and not many drivers can claim to be that quick. Yes, he's had troubles in his racecraft, and his racecraft is not the best. He's had issues with getting the best out of tire life and things like that. But he still delivered them 3 or 4 constructors title back to back. So I think he will see out the season whatever happens. But yeah, I think him coming back to Williams, it probably works for everyone that way.
Yeah.
Williams needs the team good reference point to develop the next year's car, so it might work. And he knows the Mercedes engine, he knows the systems there, so it will be a win-win for everybody.
Exactly. Final question. We just have to answer this one. It's where have Mercedes spent their 2 development tokens this year? One from Pratham. I doubt we know this information. I think it's classified, isn't it?
No, they actually make it. They speak about it, but it's not something I've actively tracked. But now I will do so. It's interesting to know where they would have spent it as well. Yes.
So there's one of the final questions that we had. Yeah. And the final one, the final one. I know it's sad that we can't answer every single one of them, but just the way it is, right? Here's another one from Gambit again. What is the top priority for Mercedes, constructors or drivers championship? Let's put this in the context of a shortened year as well. So, what are your thoughts on this, Dipak? Is it the constructors one or the drivers one that they're chasing?
Be the drivers. I think going for having a driver who holds the single most number of titles, 8th title for Hamilton, I think it's a no-brainer. I think there are enough money and enough constructors titles for their lifetime. So I think definitely Lewis Hamilton's 8th title is what every member of Mercedes is going to be working for.
And
it's tough to it's tough to argue with that, and it's tough to look elsewhere. It's a fantastic PR story. It is something that we will remember for the years to come, right? Because again, the controls that Formula One is trying to put in place, maybe we won't see drivers with so many titles, if teams genuinely end up fighting with each other and so on. So in the years to come, we will remember it was Mercedes that powered Lewis to 8 titles, for example, right? But like we've always known, it's the Constructors' Championship where that's the business end of the championship, right? So that said, I think Mercedes will be focused on getting both of them right there. They're saying we want to be statistically remembered for the driver to win the maximum titles in history, but we also want to be remembered for winning, I think, 8 titles on the trot, another statistic that people will remember in time to come. So it's tough for me to pick one. But it's hard to disagree with what Dipak has just said, because you will always remember the driver's champion that year, not necessarily the constructor's champion, unless you are a Soumil or a Sundaram. These guys just remember who finished 8th in the 1988 some Grand Prix, and they'll probably remember the answer.
As I said previously, it's the old races that I remember, not the new ones. It's a bit of a funny situation, this one. But this past hour has been so much fun. Dipak, thank you so much for coming on. Some amazing opinions, some amazing takes right there. Really a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks a lot for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time here so far. Hope to be back someday soon.
That's so good.
We are going to have you back for sure, Dipak. As the season's going to be a long one, even though we've hypothesized that it might not be.
True, yeah.
It's such a fun thing that we often end up having so many guests who we want to bring on for the second time. We've already brought Ajit Devadasan again, and we're sure that we're going to have Dipak back as well. But Dipak, thank you for being a part of this one. Folks, thank you for listening to this. If you're listening to the recorded version, thank you so much for being a part of this live stream, for sticking around with us and asking all these lovely questions. Really a pleasure to answer them. And you know the deal, right? Manscaped, that's the code right there down below. Trim Inside. Use it to get a 20% discount on all of their products, plus free shipping around the world, apart from India, sadly, but we'll get there in some time. So you know what to do. Use that code right there. Subscribe to the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits To Podium, and we shall see you for, what is it next? It's France next. So for that preview later on in this week. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, folks. Bye-bye.